Hi, Mr. Garg. Welcome back to my channel. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me again on your channel. It's an absolute pleasure to be around your channel and speaking about the NRI topics which concern them a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for the viewers, this is continuing with our NRI series. This is episode number 4 that we are recording. And the topic that we have is around specifically for NRIs who are looking to purchase an immovable property in India. And if you haven't seen the previous podcast where we specifically spoke about NRIs who are planning to sell their property if you have back in India, this one is more focused on purchasing a property. So, Mr. Garg, my first question is that can NRIs, which is a person like non-resident of Indian, can they purchase an immovable property in India? And if the answer is yes, then who can actually purchase the immovable property in India?
Well, Parul, the answer is a definite yes. NRIs can buy a immovable property in India, but there are certain exceptions out there. There are certain restricted properties, there are three in number basically, which they cannot buy. First is the agricultural land, second is the plantation property, and third are farmhouses. Barring these three exceptions, they are allowed to purchase any residential or commercial property in India. Having said that, NRIs are required to abide by the FEMA guidelines, and there are certain notifications which are brought from time to time that they need to adhere to. Then the other point to be noted is that this NRI can buy the property under consideration. They can buy under general permission. They don't require any specific permission. But this general permission is not available to everyone. It is available to Category 1, where NRIs who have been a citizen of India, but they are not residing outside India. Then there are Category 2, the persons of Indian origin. That is an individual who at any time held an Indian passport or whose father or grandfather was a citizen of India by virtue of Constitution of India. So these two categories of people are can very well go ahead and buy the property in India under general permissions. So, but there are another 2 points which anybody has to be very mindful of. Right. So the point number one is that PIOs from specified countries are not allowed to purchase immovable property in India under general permission. So who are these specified people? So these are people who are residing in countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, China, Iran, Nepal, and Bhutan. So anybody residing in these countries will not be allowed to purchase property under general permission. There are other considerations, we'll talk about it later. And then the point number 2, which I explained just a while back, that this general permission is applicable for any residential or commercial property, but not for agricultural land, plantation property, or farmhouse which is located in India. So this, the broad answer was yes, but then the conditions which I just spoke about, that will cover the answer of.
Okay, that's interesting because I wasn't aware about that there are these exceptions as well. So I think that's really good to know that the answer is yes, but it comes with its own criteria and there are some list of 7 to 8 countries. If you are PIO of those countries, then you can't. And of course, there are 3 considerations which you said, in which case people are not allowed to buy a property back in India. Yeah. So just a follow-up question I have is that then how would an NRI, let's say, establish their eligibility for purchasing a property in India? And are there any provisions, let's say, for the NRIs or PIO? So PIO is person of Indian origin, to acquire the agricultural land or plantation property or farmhouse, which you spoke about. Are there any provisions to acquire those kind of property? And how would an NRI establish their eligibility when purchasing a property in India?
Sure. So NRIs can invest in Indian real estate, that is established. But how do we establish their eligibility? So for that, it's a very, very simple process. They need to have a PIO certificate as an eligibility proof. So now this PIO certificate, he can apply it at the Indian embassy or consulate in his country where he is residing. In the absence where he is not able to obtain that valid PIO certificate due to XYZ reasons, then he can also use his parents' or grandparents' birth certificate as proof of his origin. So that will kind of establish his eligibility of buying a property in India. Now, to answer the other part, where a person wants to acquire a property like agricultural land or plantation property, so since general permission is not available for these kind of acquisitions, so such proposals will have to have specific approvals from RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, and these proposals are considered in consultation with Government of India. So once this permission is granted by RBI, they can go ahead and buy the agricultural land or the plantation property or farmhouses. These days in India, as you know, Indian economy is booming. Agricultural sector is undergoing a lot of change in terms of technology adoption, and there are new methodology of agriculture coming up. So there are many NRIs who are interested in coming up with some acquiring some agricultural land for plantation purposes or having
Right.
some orchards. So this is the way they can do it.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And can the NRIs also inherit a property in India? Because you spoke about parents, and um, for a lot of us, our parents are still back in India. What happens if they have to inherit a property, or let's say if a property can be acquired as a gift by the parents given to, let's say, their son or daughter?
Yeah. NRIs or PIOs, either ways, they can freely acquire property, any immovable property by way of gift or inheritance. But there's a point to be noted that gift or inheritance has to be made by a person residing in India. That is means person who is a resident in India. Second, he could be an NRI. An NRI can give to an NRI or a PIO. But completely a non-resident who is not even an Indian, he's not an NRI or not a PIO, then he cannot make a gift or inheritance for a property located in India.
So the person giving the gift has to be a resident. Is that what you're saying?
Resident in India, and as well, he could be an NRI or a PIO, but a non-resident, like an Australian citizen, who is an Australian by birth, by citizenship, and everything. So if he has any property located in India, by way of special permission, he had acquired it or he had inherited from someone else, he cannot gift or make an inheritance to an NRI.
Okay, so both inheritance and gift is possible. Okay.
Yes.
And another question that I have is that for foreign nationals, you mentioned that there are some restricted countries who are not allowed to purchase the immovable property under the general permissions. Then what are the provisions for them to purchase any property in India? I mean, is there still a way they can buy a property in India, or it's not possible?
Yeah. So citizens of restricted countries, irrespective of their residential status, they may acquire immovable property in India, but that can only happen with the prior approval of RBI. So they need to have that prior permission from the RBI. But except where such persons are taking immovable property on lease, and that lease period should not or shall not exceed 5 years. So in that case, they can very well go and acquire the property after having that necessary permission. But again, the FEMA regulations have clarified that this requirement will not apply to OCIs even if they are citizens of these restricted countries. So those OCIs who are residing in these restricted countries, they can very well go ahead and purchase the property under general permission. That specific permission from RBI is not required.
Okay. So the NRIs can they also buy a property, let's say, with their spouse or jointly, or the spouse also has to be meeting certain criteria in order to buy jointly with an NRI?
This has to be understood in context. So spouse of an NRI or an OCI is permitted to acquire property located in India, but they cannot acquire properties that are restricted properties. That's the point number one. Then this is when they're saying they want to acquire a property, they can acquire jointly with their spouse. So basically, a person resident outside India who is not an NRI or an OCI, but is a spouse of an NRI or an OCI, is permitted to acquire property located in India jointly with their spouse. Okay. Another important point, when they're acquiring a property jointly with their spouse under this provision, then the marriage must have been registered and has been subsisting for a continuous period of at least 2 years prior to the acquisition. Otherwise, the NRI or OCI spouse will not be able to acquire the property. They will be prohibited to acquire property in India. Then the consideration they are making for buying the property, that has to be paid through funds received in India through banking channels only, by way of inward remittance. They are having funds abroad, they are moving the funds into India, so they will have to open an NRO or NRE or FCNR accounts in that way. So that funds, that inward remittance is very necessary. So then only they will be able to buy the property.
Okay. And what about, let's say, the foreign citizens who are coming to India, let's say on a long-term visa? Because previously we spoke that anyone who is, let's say, residing in India for more than 180 days, they are also, they become a resident of India, even though they are foreign citizens for tax purposes. So let's assume if somebody who is a foreign citizen, they come to India on a long-term visa, due to some, let's work-related assignments or in general, are they also permitted to purchase a property in India or no?
Well, they can, but there are many rules and regulations they must abide with. So, if I were to start off, then FEMA regulations. So, a person being a citizen of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or Pakistan, or they belonging to any minority communities in those countries, that is like Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, Parsis, or Christians, they are now they are residing in India and they have been granted a long-term visa by central government. They may purchase only one residential immovable property as dwelling unit for themselves, like that is for self-occupation. And if they are carrying out any kind of profession or business, then one immovable property for self-employment can also be bought by them. The other thing, that such an acquisition by long-term visa holder who is a resident in India, they are also subject to certain restrictions. There are five of them, mainly major ones. I'm talking about the five major ones are that the property should not be located in and around sensitive or protected areas which are notified by the central government or cantonment areas. The property should not be located close by to those or within those premises. Second, the person has to submit a declaration to the revenue authority of the district where the property is located, specifying the sources of fund and that he or she is residing in India on a long-term visa. So when they declare this thing, then they can go and they have got the clearance, they can purchase the property. The third is the registration documents of the property should mention the nationality and the fact that such person is on a long-term visa. That has also got to be mentioned in the registry document only, because they are buying it now. They may in the future go ahead and sell this property to someone. So then that registry documents should capture all these details, that he is a foreign national, he was on a long-term visa, he was granted such and such permission, then he could buy that property. So this was the third restriction which they need to abide with. Then the fourth one, the property of such person may be attached or confiscated in the event of his or her indulgence in any kind of anti-India activities, in kind of logging or in disturbing the peace and harmony of the India, or speaking against something which is not appropriate. So in those activities, anti-India activities, in that case, his property may be attached or confiscated in that sense. Then the fifth one, which is also very important, is the copy of such documents of the purchased property. They shall be submitted to the Deputy Commissioner of Police. 1. 2. It has to be submitted with the Foreigners Registration Office, the FRO office or the FRRO office concerned, and to the Ministry of Home Affairs. So these property papers will be maintained by these authorities also, a copy of these documents. Then the last one, when the sale of immovable property so acquired is permissible only after such person has acquired Indian citizenship. So he'll not be able to go and sell the property to anyone until and unless he acquires the Indian citizenship. However, transfer of such immovable property before acquiring Indian citizenship, he'll require approval of TCP, FRRO concern accordingly, then he will be able to transfer such property.
And just a quick follow-up question I have is that for an NRI to, let's say, purchase a property, do they need to file any documents, let's say with RBI or with the government? Or are there also some restrictions on, let's say, the number of residential or commercial properties that they can purchase under the special permission I'm talking about? I mean, if you can throw some light on that.
Okay. There's no specific document they need to file with RBI when they're purchasing a property under general permissions. So a non-resident or PIO who has purchased this residential or commercial property under general permission, he will not be required to file any documents with RBI. That kind of clears the air for an NRI to purchase a property. But for the second question, around the number of properties or which they can buy, there's no restriction on that also when they are purchasing under general listing. But having said that, if you want to avail any kind of exemptions at the time of long-term capital gains, the set-offs which we had spoken of in our earlier podcast, so that will be available only when there are only 2 properties in his name. If there are more than 2, then that capital gain offset provisions go away. So then they have to be mindful that there are only 2 properties in this person's name, the NRI's name. Now, as they live outside India, NRIs have an option also to give a POA to their friends or relatives to complete the property purchase process in India. So POA could be specific, general, about the rights of the representatives who are representing them, the attorneys basically. So they can exercise their rights accordingly. Now POAs are generally issued by NRIs to their relatives to lease the properties out. In case their properties are being leased out, they have to enter into a rental agreements or any way of property registration. So those time POAs are required.
Right. And does the NRI need to be present in India, like physically present in India at the time of purchase, or they can complete the transfer with the help of power of attorney? Like you were saying, they can still have that power of attorney, somebody assigned as that. So does this person, like the power of attorney, has the complete control? They can complete the transaction on their behalf, or the NRI still has to be physically present?
So answer to this question would be yes and no. Why I say so? First, let's understand how power of attorney is governed. Any NRI who's making a power of attorney, he'll have to get it notarized by the Indian embassy or the Indian consulate in the respective country. So that kinds of authenticates that this power of attorney is genuine. Then he sends that power of attorney, that original power of attorney document, not an electronic or a scanned version, to the person in whose name the power of attorney has been made. He will go and have it registered in India also. Okay. But now, when I said the answer to this question is both yes and no, it depends on state to state revenue authority. So one state might allow that the complete sale transaction can be carried out because this is a registered POA. The POA is granting that rights to the attorney to make to complete the sale formalities, the registry formalities. So that transaction can get concluded. But there are some states in India where the registrar mandates that the pre-formalities before the registry can be done by the POA. But at the time of final registry, the person has to be present physically. So that kind of is it's a yes and a no mixed bag answer for that.
Right. And how can the NRIs fund their purchase? Like, I'm assuming typically people use bank loans or, for example, so how can they fund the purchase?
NRIs can, like resident Indians, they can very well fund through their bank loans. So if they want to invest, they should have an NRI account with one of the authorized nationalized banks or commercial banks in India. Then they have to do all their transactions, the down payment which they will be making through those Indian banks. So those Indian banks, we have already spoken about that they have to be in the nature of NRO or NRE or FCNR accounts. So all inward money remittances has to be done through that. But the RBI fixed a upper ceiling on it. So the loan can be only to the extent of maximum of 80% of the value of property. So that can be funded by the financial institution. Rest has to come through NRI's personal sources. Indian financial institution shall give a rupee loan to them, and it needs to be repaid only and only in the Indian rupee, not through foreign dollars or anything. It could be that he's remitting that loan repayment money through his overseas income, but that inward remittance has to be made into the NRE NRO account, and from there the loan repayment can be made.
So the LVR can be maximum, loan to value ratio can be maximum 80%, not more.
80%. Yeah. So
Right.
in many countries, I believe in Australia, you can go as high as 95%.
90, 95, yeah.
And
Like, I mean, not 95, but 90%, yes.
Yes. So in India also, the resident Indians, in many cases where their ITRs are looking good, the person is of a younger age, and banks evaluate that they can very well service their loans, so they can stretch up to 90-95% of that. But for NRIs, the RBI has made a restriction of 80%.
Is there, let's say, a TDS or a tax deducted at source, which needs to be deducted on a property purchase by NRIs in India? I don't know, how does that, the TDS, which is tax deductible at source, how does that work?
TDS is applicable on NRIs also. So it needs to be deducted at the time of making payment by non-resident Indians. Okay. So now TDS is applicable on every immovable property other than agricultural land. So in case he's making an agricultural land purchase or farmhouse, or as we discussed, the plantation property, they do not need to deduct a TDS. But TDS which is being deducted by NRIs, then he will have to deposit it into the account of the government himself. He has to deduct it before making that payment to the seller of the property. And another thing, that the property value, the sale transaction, should exceed 50 lakh rupees. In case the sale transaction is less than 50 lakhs, then there's no TDS applicability. Okay. Then another point, now if from whomever the NRI is buying a property, there can be two scenarios, whether that person has a PAN number or he does not have a PAN number. In case the seller, he has a PAN number, then the TDS rate would be 1% of the entire purchase value. In case he does not have it, then the TDS rate of 20% will be applicable. So in that sense, he needs to be mindful of this thing, to ask for the seller that he has a PAN or not, and whether the transaction is above 50 lakhs or not.
Okay, fair enough. And what happens after deducting the TDS? Let's say, do they require a certificate? If, let's say, there are delays, then do they need to pay any interest on that? What happens after deducting the TDS? Okay, so when the TDS has been deducted, now deductor has to deposit that TDS to the government within 7 days from the end of the month in which the TDS was deducted. In case of any deduction made in March, then the due date of depositing is 30th April, not 7th April. So for only transactions, the TDS transactions, deductions made in the month of March, they have an extended timeline of 30th April. But for others, it is 7th of the next month from the end of the month in which the TDS was deducted. Then this how to deposit it? It's online payment. It has to be done on the income tax department portal through an authorized banks. Also, once the TDS has been deposited, then the NRIs would be getting a certificate called 16B within 15 days from the deposit of TDS, and that, along with Form 26QB, has to be provided to the seller. So that 26QB will have all the details of the transaction. What was the sale price, what was the amount of TDS, the PAN number of both seller and the buyer. So all those details would be mentioned in the Form 26QB. That will result in that TDS being reflected in the buyer's PAN number. Now, for the other part to your question, whether there are any kind of interest or levied on the delay of deposit, then yes, there is an interest or penalty which is levied, and that is to the tune of 1% per month
for any delay in payment of TDS. So in case he misses the deadline of 7th, then he will automatically be levied a 1% interest on the total TDS deducted by him.
And who pays this?
Buyer, the NRI in this case, the buyer would pay
Buyer.
this one. Yes, because he made the TDS deduction. He was supposed to deposit it. He had a certain deadline. He did not make that payment, so he needs to bear the penalty of sorts.
Right. No, I think this has been a very insightful session, because it seems like they can still buy a property, but there are a lot of provisions and a lot of technicalities that I'm not too sure if people are aware about it, but I am definitely hopeful that through this session, people would have learned a lot, and they can plan their purchase in case if they want to.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pradul, for bringing me here.
We'll continue to have these sessions with you specifically for the NRI community. And thank you so much once again for coming on my channel and sharing such nice insights with everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you.
FMR Finance Weekly. Simplify your life with our financial advice.